What if justice wasn't about punishment but exposure? Not of the crime, but of the soul that commits it. In the heart of a crowded city, where footsteps echo between alleyways of desperation, Dostoevsky placed a man, not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a question. A student, a thinker, a man haunted by the weight of his own logic. He believed, like many today, that intelligence could justify action, that suffering could be solved by a single, decisive blow. But what he discovered was this: crime does not stain the hands first, it stains the conscience, and punishment does not arrive from police or judges. It arrives in the silence of the mind, in the tremble of every thought that dares to justify what the heart already knows is wrong. This is not a story about murder. It's about the murder within. The moment a person begins to believe they are above the rest. Raskolnikov thought himself exceptional. He wore his suffering like armor and called his isolation strength. But what he could not escape was the human ache of being known. Dostoevsky knew something that modern life often forgets: that the greatest punishment is not prison. It's the unbearable burden, carrying truth alone. And in a world where performance masks pain and brilliance excuses cruelty, this story still asks us, what happens when we trade love, when pride dresses as justice? Raskolnikov believed he was different, not just smarter, but set apart, chosen by some internal logic that whispered, some lives matter more than others. And this is where the frame begins, not with the act of violence, but with the belief behind it. The belief that suffering is a currency, and he, in his brilliance, was allowed to spend it. How many people today quietly carry that same arrogance? We scroll through feeds, we hear about tragedies, but some lives feel too distant, some pain too abstract, and we don't say it aloud, but deep down. We start to divide the world into tiers of value. Dostoevsky wasn't warning us about a murder. He was warning us about a mindset. Raskolnikov's crime wasn't the axe. It was the framework he built in his mind, where intellect justifies cruelty, where pride wears the mask of moral clarity, where we crown ourselves judge and jury, not of others only, but of our own humanity. That's the real punishment, when we begin to believe that righteousness can exist without compassion. In today's world, this frame still thrives. It's in the cold professionalism that silences emotion, in the systems that reward results, but forget the people crushed in the process, in the influencer who believes their success makes them immune to the needs of the ordinary, in the student who believes intelligence makes them untouchable, in you, in me, in the quiet moments we categorize pain as either earned or irrelevant. Dostoevsky's brilliance wasn't in describing crime. It was in revealing the frame that precedes it, the story we tell ourselves to make harm look noble, to make selfishness sound philosophical, to make detachment feel like wisdom. And so we must ask, what frame are you living inside? Do you believe your suffering makes you superior? Do you secretly think your burdens justify your coldness? Do you imagine yourself above those who are weak or loud or needy? If so, you're closer to Raskolnikov than you think. But here's the grace. The frame can be broken, not with more logic, not with more brilliance, but with humility, with a trembling voice that says, I was wrong, because the truth is, the moment we stop pretending to be above others, we begin to stand among them, and that is where real healing begins. The descent that reveals ooze. Raskolnikov didn't shatter all at once. His unraveling was quiet, incremental, and that's how most descent begins. Not with a scream, but with silence. Not with chaos, but with cold logic. He was not some cartoon villain. He was a man with a plan, a moral thesis, a justifying reason for why someone had to suffer. But here's the principle Dostoevsky was showing us. The moment you believe harm is acceptable, in the name of progress, you've already started to lose yourself. In modern life, we do this without axes. We rationalize the late-night emails that tear us from family. We justify betrayals because it's just business. We dismiss empathy because it's inefficient, unscalable, or soft. It starts small, but erosion always does. You cut corners to survive until corners become walls. You stop feeling until numbness becomes the norm. Raskolnikov wasn't just a character. He was a cautionary mirror. A reminder that brilliance without humility becomes delusion. That isolation is not strength. It's a slow decay of the soul. The hidden cost of rationalization. Raskolnikov's greatest weapon wasn't his intellect. It was his ability to justify the unthinkable. He told himself the act was necessary, that the world would be better, that he was different, even chosen. He wasn't driven by hatred, but by a dangerous idea. That reason alone could rewrite morality, but Dostoevsky knew better, and so do we. Every day, people silence their guilt in the name of logic. They say, "It's just temporary. I had no choice. Someone else would have done it anyway." And at first, it works. You move forward. You breathe a little easier. But soon the silence inside you grows heavier. Not because you were caught, but because your conscience remembers. There is a moment, always, when Raskolnikov lies in his bed, the murder behind him, and yet he can't sleep. The world hasn't punished him, but his own mind has become the prison. That's the price of rationalization. It doesn't erase the wrong. It distances you from your own reflection, until one day you wake up and no longer recognize yourself. In our time, we rarely swing axes, but we often trade truth for success, empathy for efficiency, and soul for status. And we tell ourselves, "It's what I had to do." But just because it's explainable doesn't mean it's justifiable. Dostoevsky doesn't scream this at you. He whispers it in the insomnia, in the shame, in the look Raskolnikov gives the mirror, when even his own gaze feels foreign. You don't wake up until you break. For much of crime and punishment, Raskolnikov is not a man. He's a theory walking on two legs, detached cult, living in the shadow of an idea. That greatness gives you permission. That morality is optional, if your vision is big enough. But Dostoevsky makes him bleed slowly, not from justice, from guilt, from isolation, from the unbearable weight of being right, while feeling entirely wrong. That's how it often happens in real life too. It's not the consequences that wake us up. It's the exhaustion, the loneliness, the quiet question that haunts you at 3 a.m. If I'm so right, why do I feel so hollow? Eventually, Raskolnikov stops running. Not because the world corners him, but because his soul does. And that is the turning point we rarely talk about. Not the moment someone gets caught, but the moment they surrender to themselves. Because deep down, we all carry a compass. It doesn't yell, it doesn't punish, but it aches. And when you've ignored it long enough, it doesn't destroy you. It invites you back to confession, back to truth, back to a self you can finally live with. This isn't just Raskolnikov's story. It's yours. It's mine. It's every moment we've lied to stay afloat and realized we'd rather drown in truth than live another day in disguise. The myth of being above consequence. There's a moment in Crime and Punishment when Raskolnikov believes he's transcended morality, that he exists outside of it, above it, like Napoleon, like power itself. It's the same delusion we see today in tech and business and war. People playing chess with human lives, convinced that vision justifies harm, that brilliance outranks empathy, that laws bend for the exceptional. But Dostoevsky exposes the lie, not with fireworks, but with silence, with insomnia, with the slow erosion of a man who can't meet his own reflection. You don't have to murder someone to relate to that feeling. Every time you betray your values to get ahead, every time you silence your conscience to stay included, you feel it, that invisible weight, that splitting inside your own skin. Because the truth, you're not made to be a machine. You're not built to optimize at the cost of your soul. And no matter how far you climb, you can't outrun the floor beneath your own guilt. Even today, in our hyper-calculated world, where data justifies every decision and results overshadow relationships, the soul keeps score, not with punishment, but with disintegration. The farther you drift from your values, the less of yourself remains. Dostoevsky wasn't just writing about a man in 19th century Russia. He was writing about you when you wear ambition like armor, when you numb your empathy to survive, when your brilliance begins to cost too much. And he wasn't judging, he was warning. The apartment of shadows. There's a room in St. Petersburg. Smop. Its ceiling low. Its light, barely reaching the corners. It's where Raskolnikov lives. But the room isn't just a room. It's a reflection of a mind closing in on itself, of thoughts pacing in tight, circular patterns. And in that apartment, something unravels, not with violence, but with thought. Because the crime wasn't just an act of blood. It was committed long before the axe was raised, in silence, in solitude, in the arrogance of unchecked logic. How many of us live in rooms like that today? Not physically, but mentally, scrolling endlessly in the dark, justifying compromises, silencing the soft parts of ourselves to fit into a hardened world. We convince ourselves we're different, smarter, more evolved. We say, it's just business, it's just survival, but inside, we're trembling with the same question Raskolnikov faced. What have I become? The stranger in the mirror, after the crime, Raskolnikov doesn't run. He stays, sleeps in the same bed, walks the same streets, carries the same name, but he is not the same man. Guilt doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in, like water beneath a locked door. He begins to split, not physically, but morally. He tells himself it was rational. He calls it a test. He believes he passed. But every glance in the mirror feels like meeting a stranger. We've all done this. Not murder, perhaps. But we've crossed lines we swore we wouldn't, told white lies, ghosted someone who trusted us, ignored injustice because it wasn't profitable to care. We justify it, we move on. But some part of us watches and remembers. Dostoevsky knew this. The worst punishment isn't prison. It's the silent stare from the version of yourself you can no longer recognize. And that punishment, it doesn't start in court. It starts alone. The hidden hand that doesn't point, but waits. As Raskolnikov walks the streets, he begins to speak less. Not because he has nothing to say, but because truth is too heavy to carry in conversation. Around him, life continues. Children play, merchants haggle. Women wash the same stairs they did yesterday, but inside him, there's a collapse. Silent, unseen, complete. And just when he's certain he will drown in his own mind, someone enters his story. Sonia. She is not a savior in shining light. She's a girl, living on the margins. A soul forced into suffering, but untouched by hate. She listens, not to fix, not to accuse, but to witness. And in her listening, Raskolnikov hears something louder than any judge ever could: compassion. That's the real turn. Not a dramatic conversion, not a tearful apology. Just presence. Sonia offers no theology, only proximity. And Dostoevsky teaches us, sometimes the only way a person climbs out of hell is because someone else is willing to sit beside them in it. You don't heal by escaping, you heal by confessing. Raskolnikov didn't run to freedom, he walked to judgment, slowly. And that's where the real redemption began, not in the court, not in the punishment, but in the moment he looked into Sonia's eyes and finally said the words he had buried beneath intellect and pride. It was me. That moment wasn't weakness, it was resurrection. Because confession isn't about shame, it's about weight. And in a world obsessed with hiding, with curating perfect images, and deleting our worst moments, Dostoevsky offers a revolutionary truth: you are not free until you stop pretending. What Raskolnikov teaches us is what many of us are terrified to learn, that the path to healing goes through the valley of honesty. And until we're willing to look at our mess, to name our brokenness, to sit in our guilt, we'll never feel the grace that waits on the other side. Grace doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for truth. By speaking it, doesn't erase the past. He opens the future. You're carrying something that was meant to be laid down. We live in a world that punishes honesty with silence. Confession doesn't go viral. It gets buried beneath noise, distraction, and curated strength. But Dostoevsky reminds us that silence we carry, it's not peace, it's pressure. And eventually, the weight of what you've hidden becomes heavier than the thing itself. You may not have taken a life, but maybe you took a dream from yourself. Maybe you abandoned your worth to fit into a version of life you never believed in. Maybe your betrayal wasn't of others, but of the voice inside that kept whispering what was right. And like Raskolnikov, you kept walking, functioning, achieving, performing. But the shadow followed, because until truth is spoken, the soul can't breathe. We think hiding buys us time, but hiding only delays healing. So this is the wisdom you carry forward. You don't have to publish your confession, but you do need to speak it, even if only to yourself, even if it terrifies you, even if no one applauds. Because the moment you do, you stop being split in half. You begin to return to wholeness, to integrity, to a life that no longer runs from itself. Redemption isn't loud, but it's always real. When Raskolnikov confessed, the world didn't cheer. There were no parades, no grand forgiveness, just and prison, and the slow, aching rebirth of a man who had to rebuild, not from fame, but from failure. That's what real redemption looks like. Not headlines, but habits, not applause, but alignment. In your life, that might look like apologizing for a silence that cost someone their peace, admitting to yourself that your strength was built on fear, not truth, choosing, today, not to run from the version of you that's still buried beneath, shuld. Redemption doesn't always come in a single act. It comes in a pattern of returning to what matters, to what's honest, to what you already knew, but had forgotten how to say out loud. And in that pattern, you aren't becoming someone new. You're remembering someone sacred. So as you finish this story, ask yourself, what truth have you buried? What shame have you let define you? What wholeness have you postponed for fear of being seen? Because this, right now, could be your confession moment. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present and brave enough to begin again. You are not beyond redemption. You are its proof. Dostoevsky didn't write Crime and Punishment to entertain. He wrote it to expose us, not just to the horror of a crime, but to the silent suffering behind it, to the battle inside each of us, between the person we pretend to be and the one we're terrified to become. Raskolnikov is not just a character, he's a mirror held up to the parts of us that believe, if I'm smart enough, if I suffer enough, if I hide my guilt long enough, maybe I don't need to change, but we do. We need to change, because silence doesn't save us, isolation doesn't purify us, and punishment alone doesn't transform us. Only the slow walk back to truth does. In a world chasing instant forgiveness, Dostoevsky reminds us, redemption is not granted. It's grown in the cold, in the consequence, in the company of our own aching honesty. So here's the truth we don't say enough. You don't have to be fixed to be forgiven. You don't have to be fearless to be free. You just have to turn, not with grand speeches, but with real steps. The step to confess, the step to reconcile, the step to keep walking even if no one claps. This isn't the end of your story, it's the return. And when they ask, what saved you? You won't need to explain. You live the answer.